Hello, today is December 25th, 2018. In many parts of the world, people are celebrating Christmas Day. Yesterday, I did a Facebook Live, my very first Facebook Live. I was inspired to speak in dedication to the people that I know personally who are choosing to spend time apart from their family gatherings for healthy, sane reasons, because they're not respected or heard or acknowledged, or at best, or at worst, openly shamed, ridiculed, and blamed in these gatherings. So they've taken one step toward claiming their adulthood by choosing to be apart. And I want to speak about this because it's been a big step for me in my life. I spoke about it yesterday because I was realizing that it was 10 years ago, in 2008, that I first made a choice on my own behalf, where I felt like I had a right to opt out of a family gathering. I won't say that it was the first time that I opted out of something. I think that would have been when I decided to graduate from medical school and not do a residency. That was very radical, but it was really just one step in a big journey that's ongoing today and continues to be a practice of reclaiming and remembering things that were taken away as a child. So I talked in that Facebook Live about this book, The Tao of Fully Feeling by Pete Walker, which I just recently discovered, but I've been really diving into it. I brought it along with me to a family wedding that I attended earlier this year, and it really helped me to ground in some of the feelings that I was experiencing that were mostly flashbacks to previous family gatherings where explosive things had happened, and I was re-experiencing the trauma of that and really fearing in anticipation that they would happen again. And they did in miniature form, because as people get older, their capacity to be explosively or homicidally raging kind of decreases, but does not go away. So I'm going to jot down because this is completely kind of improvisational, but I've been thinking about it. I just want to talk about this Human Bill of Rights that Pete Walker has on his website, which I really love because I realized in reading it that as a child, I had no rights. I was the instrument of the adults in my life. And there's a lot of people who have that philosophy about parenting. And some of it is inherited and some of it is chosen. That they've really convinced themselves that this is the right way, that children need to be manhandled. And so when is it? My question is, as I'm going to read these rights, if we never had these rights as a child and then we become parents who also believe that these rights don't get extended to children, how is it and when is it that we create a society where all of a sudden people have these rights? So we pay lip service to it because it sounds like we're being a good person to extend these rights to others, but in our own homes, we actually subscribe to the belief that our children don't have these rights. So it's pretty amazing. So let me just read some of these. He has a list of 21. I'm just going to read a handful. 1, I have the right to be treated with respect. So that is sort of open to what do you mean by respect? Because I had teachers who treated children with respect, meaning respecting their intelligence, which I totally agree with, that there's a lot of intelligence at birth in the human, that it's not all there, because there's a lot of development that happens, but it's not zero. So to acknowledge that at birth, a human being already has an intelligence that is developing and gathering information and learning. I agree with that. And then those same teachers would say that because they respected the child, they would treat them like any other adult, which means not respecting them. So that one is interesting. 2, I have the right to say no. This is the one that really got me yesterday when I read it, because I find that as an adult, I haven't fully recovered that full claim to my right to say no to things that people ask me to do, that I still have to kind of really squirm around inside for a very long time, trying to take care of the other person, trying to find a way to say yes when the answer is really no. And it takes a long time for me to even find that truth inside, that the answer is no. Where did that come from? Well, when I read it, I realized, no, as a child, I didn't have the right to say no. Now, if I were to, when I confronted my mom about this, which I did 2 years ago, big mistake, but also informative, she would say, even at the age of 2 and 3, that I chose to do things, that she never coerced me to do anything, and that everything that I did, I chose. Okay. So maybe that's her way of saying that she treated me with respect, that at the age of 2, I had the right to choose. However, what's missing from that picture is the emotional memory that she would be homicidally raging. And when I say homicide, that is actually threatening to kill people with things, with weapons that could kill people if she used them. So not only is she an adult that's much bigger than a 2-year-old, but she has an actual weapon, and she's actually threatening to use it to kill people using those words and holding the weapon. So you can put that together however you want and kind of come up with whatever explanation you'd like to. But basically, there's no explanation other than the memory in the child that you don't have a choice in that moment, that you will die unless you comply with whatever that homicidally raging person is saying to do. So it's a lot of conflict. And I talked yesterday on the Facebook Live about people who haven't faced the truth of things and maybe saying to me right now, why don't you grow up, get over it, and stop living in the past? And to that I say, I don't really need to respond to that anymore, because I've lived my whole life responding to those voices, trying to move on and creating the facade of moving on through this external happy thing. But what I lost in that process was the capacity to fully feel the rest of the real feelings, including fear, anger, and sadness. And when somebody cannot feel fear, it's a problem if they're ever put into a situation where they actually need to get out, actually need to say no to a threat. So the dominant memory of me trying to say no or thinking of saying no is fear of death. And so reading this, I have the right to say no, is life-changing. It's a small sentence, and it seems trivial to so many people that haven't examined this inside themselves. But I'm speaking to you who is examining this inside yourself, and acknowledging that sometimes it's huge. It's a lifetime practice to reclaim the right to say no to anything, even being offered food, which is another, I'm going to talk about cultural patterns today. But there's a pattern in the Chinese culture, and it might just be from a certain time period when there was a lot of famine during the mid-20th century, which is when my parents and grandparents were coming of age and being born and growing up. So there was a true lack of food at some points in time. So the habit of force feeding children came up, and this is something that really is something I won't stand for, but is a huge consistent pattern in my family, on one side of the family, which is forcing people to eat. And it has made eating and family gatherings totally distasteful, because I can't just sit there and enjoy it and like eat what I want to eat, which seems like another human right, doesn't it? Like I can choose, I should add that, I can choose what I want to eat. And that's a luxury, because we don't live in a time where everyone's fighting over the final sweet potato during World War II. Thank God. Yes, I feel grateful for that. But the reality is, when I'm sitting at a banquet table with 20 people and I'm getting looks of scorn for not eating, and I'm not going to comply like my dad does, overeating, gorging himself, and like complying with every single request that people dump food on his plate and he eats it. If I don't do that, what I get is rejection and disgust and disdain and incomprehension, and then I fall to the level of, less than acceptable. So then I'm constantly trying to either hide or like make up for it in some other way, which I gave up on about 12 years ago. So yeah, if you can hear anger in my voice, that's right. That pisses me off. And so when people don't know why I don't want to show up to family gatherings and subject myself to that, it's because I choose not to play that game anymore. I don't care who you are. I'm not going to be forced to do stuff, because on a daily basis, I'm fighting that battle in my head, trying to not force myself to do things. So to sign up for an event where I get forced to do something by people that supposedly love me, no thank you. So culturally, there might be these dynamics going on, and I'm going to get to, that's related to how these patterns are inherited. That it didn't just start with our parents or our grandparents, that it may go back millennia to the history of the country and the history of the world. And so we can do that research, which I've done, to try to come up with explanations, to try to understand the origins of it. And that's one aspect of this process, is to try to understand the origins of it, to see that it's not personal, but very collective. But there's also a personal impact. So, this discussion that we're having right now about intention versus impact, like, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you, but you did. So now I have to deal with that. I have to deal with the impact, which is, all of this memory that needs to be processed, and I need to find a space to process it. And it's often not in society, because we are very, very bad at expression of emotions that don't fit into the box of advertising. And basically, when we're talking about advertising, the emotions are, I'm better than you because I'm happier than you, or you should be afraid of not having what I have. And so there's not a lot of room for real grief, real anger, or real fear of real things, not fear of not measuring up to other people. So moving on with the list of rights. And again, it's Pete Walker, pete-walker.com. It's a great website, but I think it really is a companion to his books. And it's a companion to a larger process of self-discovery, that really his work stems from the work of Alice Miller, which I have posted on my Instagram before. This is a pivotal book, Drama of the Gifted Child, that talks about the denial that we have to be in order to survive being manipulated as a child, and then how we unconsciously pass that down as teachers, parents, therapists, advice givers, and everything, when we haven't worked through what's really going on for us, how we unconsciously seek out places to act it out. This is another book by her, Free from Lies, also good, similar subject. She's written like 8 books on this subject, and now I understand it. Like when you uncover something like this, it's like you want to share it, and you want people to have as many opportunities as they can to think about it and and touch something inside them that's true for them. And that's how I'm feeling right now. I don't know how long I'll feel that way, but that's how I'm feeling right now. So moving on with the list of rights. Third is I have the right to make mistakes. This is related to my play the wrong note moment, which was like, whoa. Like I've never let myself think about how to do it wrong because I spend all my time trying not to make mistakes. Next, I have the right to change my mind or my plans. Big one. There was a lot of rage associated with unexpected changing of the mind because of like pathological attachment to rigid expectations of what's going to happen, trying to control everything. So I've had to recover the right to change my mind. I have the right to have my own feelings, beliefs, opinions, and preferences. Wow, that's a new one. That's a big new one. Imagine that if you could have your own feelings when you're at a family gathering, or your own beliefs and opinions, or preferences. Like, oh no, thank you. I don't want to eat that. My niece is allowed to do that because she's like half white and she's like American fully. So my parents actually accept that answer from her. Like, no, thank you. They think it's cute that she could say no, thank you, when never was I allowed to say no without being attacked for it or being asked what's wrong with me for saying no. So it's like there's a price attached to having a preference. So maybe there's the right to have it, but you'll pay a price. You'll have to take a blow for it. So you have to sort of armor up and decide whether it's okay, whether you're ready to go to battle for it, for that preference, or whether you just want to say, forget it. And basically so many of us live in that settling, like, forget it. I don't want to fight anymore. So I'm just going to, not say what I really want. And how many lives are built on that? And let's just take a moment to grieve for those lives that are given up to that fear of having to take a blow to claim a preference or a belief or a feeling. I mean, at the most basic level, a feeling that's denied to someone out of fear of being attacked. And by the way, when you trace these things back into history, they are embedded in times of authoritarian rule and control. And so in my parents' case, I can definitely look right back into 20th century, mid-20th century history and find the place where the authoritarian government, who had to seize control of an entire population very quickly, instilled the fear in every single person that if you voice an opinion or have an idea, you'll be killed. So that shuts people up really fast. Okay, and I'm talking about Taiwan, and I'm talking about the KMT government, which my grandfather worked for, which is the reason that he had to flee the mainland when the communists won in 1949, bringing my mom at age 6 and all of her siblings under the age of 6 to the island. And they were so frozen in that paralysis of like having to deny who they were because he was a dangerous person because of his ideas that were sometimes in line with the authoritarian government, but often were not. And when they weren't, he was under surveillance or, under a lot of suspicion. And so my grandmother we would describe her in Western medicine as paranoid, schizophrenic possibly. But when I look at the history, she was quite possibly actually under surveillance by the government, not just delusional about it, and had to deny her affiliation with a perpetrator because they had just left a situation where they were the losers in a civil war and then became the oppressors on a tiny island. And so that flip was like that's hard to process so quickly, like being defeated and then becoming the dominator and oppressor of another people. But that's what it was. So my parents are in such deep denial about the fear campaign of that time, that they were like, oh, it wasn't that bad. other than the fact that we couldn't speak or think or have an idea or an opinion out of fear of death, it wasn't that bad. So here's the difference. This is another fascination of mine. The difference between what happened in Europe in World War II and the survivors of those atrocities, which we all are very aware of. The Holocaust is something that the entire world has a name for and is aware of, and the survivors of that have created amazing art as well as science and the field of cognitive psychology. The same, or, we actually don't know the extent of the atrocities that occurred in Asia in the same time frame because they were hidden deliberately by the governments. It was also, the language barriers. It wasn't as easy to get a hold of the records. And the third and most important thing is the silence of the survivors. And Holocaust survivors tell their children about what happened. So there's a storyline of suffering and tragedy and oppression and atrocity and resilience and the whatever it took for those people to survive. And many, many flavors of survival were expressed. So there's a community around it, and there's an amazing legacy, and there's both grief and pride about having survived that. Whereas in the total void of stories associated with whatever it was that happened in China and Taiwan in the 20th century, which was a huge upheaval, just constant war for an entire century, civil war, foreign invasion, and then internal, cultural revolution, which is a totally other topic that will never be fully discussed thanks to the Chinese government. But that lack of storytelling is enacting a toll on future generations. And we cannot come together around things we cannot talk about because we don't have the stories, because we're living a facade and a lie. And yeah, there's a lot of rage around that. Justified rage around the fact that we know something happened because we know there's a lot of trauma in our families that came from somewhere before here and before this time and extended back. We don't even know the number of generations. And the only way we can talk about it is within the mental illness community by pathologizing it and diagnosing it as something, when in fact it's our history. So how about that? I mean, when there's an intense stigma around mental illness, and at the same time that's the only language that you have to talk about your history. So that's the setup. I'm just going to read 3 more rights on my list of human rights. I have the right to protest sarcasm, destructive criticism, and unfair treatment. Now, the last one, unfair, I don't believe in fairness. That's just like what has come out of my childhood is I don't believe in any definition of what fair is. I don't think there is such a thing. So I'll just take on sarcasm and destructive criticism. You have the right to protest sarcasm and destructive criticism. Newsflash, did you know that? You could actually speak up. That's something that I've been developing in my work to create my one-woman show, is like finding the voice of the one who can protest and stand up to all this stupid inner critic, abusive inner talk, and it's just not there. The speaking up voice internally is not there. It has come out in many different ways in my leadership style, and management of things, this control, and sort of, that's my protest. But like, who would I be if I could stand up for myself inside and not have to control people in the outer world in the same way? It's a great question. And that's what I'm in the process of exploring and trying to uncover. Last two. I have a right to play, waste time, and not always be productive. Love that one. I have a right to seek healthy and mutually supportive relationships. And the irony of this is that those, might not be within my family. That my family might not have the foothold on health and support. That's a hard one, and I'm going to go to culture now. Here's why that one for me, somebody of a Chinese descent, where my parents are heavily from the culture, not just how I look on my face, but like the immersion of my parents in the traditions and the doctrines of the culture. And one of the doctrines is children have no rights and parents are God, meaning that they can do no wrong, and your worth as a person is measured by how well you treat your parents, not how well you treat your children, which is sort of an American thing, like the parenting badge, like the parenting trophy. But the Confucian idea, which has only been around for roughly 4,000 years, so, it's like you are measured by how well you treat your parents. So imagine the righteousness of that. Like, how anxious are you as a child to become a parent so that you can exact your revenge for how you were treated, and then you don't have any accountability because your children have to treat you well or they will be condemned forever to hell as bad people. That's like the best religion ever, to promote procreation of the species on the planet. Like, everyone is racing to have a kid so that they can finally take out all their aggressions on someone who is helpless, powerless, and also obligated by the social system to not exact their revenge in the other direction. It's brilliant, actually. Good work, Confucius. So going back to the right to say no, I was thinking about this really, all day yesterday and last night. Like, what does that mean? Like, when a child, because I did, again, have that confrontation with my mom to say, like, don't you want to, like, apologize for anything that you did? I just wanted to hear her, like, acknowledge that she was crazy. And I said, don't you want to acknowledge any of the things that you did when I was really little? Like, I didn't want to mention the exact things because it might be too painful for her. I wanted to kind of let her lead. And she was very staunch in saying, no, I have nothing to apologize for. I gave you everything. I did everything in my power. I did everything. I gave you everything. I gave you my whole life. So then it went down that path of like self-sacrificial, like I did everything. I gave up everything for you, which was a common message. And so I think I said something like, oh, well, what about like, pressuring me to whatever? And she's like, you chose. You were 3 years old. You chose. And so listening to that and realizing that my choices were actually to do what she said or to die by her own hand. In the 3-year-old, I'm getting into the 3-year-old. The 3-year-old doesn't understand what's going on. There's like just an emotional being and a neurological system that's wired to stay away from danger. So there's no neurological system in nature that's wired to go toward a threat of death, okay, from an external source, no matter whether it's the mother or not. So there's no way that was an actual choice for any aged person, especially a 3-year-old, where it's like, you do this or I'm going to kill you. So to say that I chose is kind of like, here's the analogy that I came up with that I'm really proud of. It's kind of like saying that the Native Americans chose to convert to Christianity when the Spanish came. Think about that one. So, yeah, a bunch of Native Americans chose to convert to Christianity when the Spanish invaded. But what was their choice? Their choice was to be killed or convert. So was it really a choice? And this relates to history. So when we have histories where we say that people chose when in fact they were coerced by threat of death, then we make it okay to say that our children chose also, even though we threatened them with death. And I don't know if you who are watching this had a mother who threatened you with death. I mean, I did, but you don't have to have that to relate in terms of like a 3-year-old feels very threatened by a large person screaming in its face, even running around like a wild person, threatening to like hit them with something, is like a very large death threat running around in that little person's world. And just if you imagine some adults in your life right now that may be public figures or maybe actual people in your private life that run around in adult bodies, but emotionally they're like children running around with this large wild animal chasing it constantly. You might empathize a little bit more now. So I think that's all I had to say, and I wanted to make this version of it on YouTube because I couldn't figure out how to download the Facebook Live. I think that Facebook is trying to deter that behavior, which is a smart business move for them. I wanted to send a message to those of you who are either struggling to make your way through very painful family gatherings at this holiday, or who have made the difficult but healthy choice to be separate and apart from those family gatherings where you're forced to drink in toxicity as part of the meal. I honor you, and I know that you are the voiceless ones today and other days where people are sending around blanketed messages of standard protocols for how you should be feeling on a holiday, and it doesn't always fit. There's many, many feelings that we can experience on days like this, and we don't have to accept the collective message of how it should be. So this is a message of permission and understanding, and just my message that I see you, and I hold in my heart the names that I'm not saying out loud of the people that I know in my life who are stepping into their own selfhood and adulthood, caring for the child that they were, that was not cared for when they were actual children, and taking this step for themselves. No longer waiting. I think that entire lives are spent waiting for these people in our lives to change or to somehow acknowledge what we know happened, and because it happened in us. And we can spend and waste our entire lives waiting for those people to change when all it takes is the courage to act, take one small action on our own behalf and keep taking actions in the direction of our own health. Thanks for listening.